History is rarely made by the invisible. We remember the loud, the violent, the boastful. But on Wednesday, November 24th, 1971, history was made by a man whose greatest weapon was his absolute, terrifying averageness. It was the eve of Thanksgiving. The Pacific Northwest was trapped under a bruised, weeping sky. At Portland International Airport, thousands of travelers were rushing to get home. Among them was a man in a dark business suit, a white shirt, a black clip-on tie, and brown loafers. He carried a black attaché case. He had no luggage. He walked to the Northwest Orient Airlines counter. He didn't show an ID, because in 1971, he didn't have to. He paid $20 in cash for a 30-minute flight to Seattle. On the passenger manifest, he wrote the name Dan Cooper. Within hours, that name would become a permanent fixture in American mythology. He would hijack a commercial airliner, extort a fortune, demand the impossible, and then step out of a jet flying at 10,000 feet into a freezing pitch-black storm. He was never seen again. Welcome to the definitive investigation into the only unsolved skyjacking in commercial aviation history. This is the strange disappearance of D.B. Cooper. To understand the crime, you must understand the canvas. The late 1960s and early 1970s were the golden age of skyjacking. It was an epidemic. Between 1961 and 1972, there were nearly 160 hijackings in American airspace. Most were desperate people, demanding to be flown to Cuba. Security was virtually non-existent. You could walk onto a tarmac with a loaded weapon as easily as you could a newspaper. But Dan Cooper was different. He wasn't a political radical. He was a tactician. At 2:50 p.m., Cooper boarded Northwest Orient Flight 305. The aircraft was a Boeing 727-100. This was not a random choice. The Boeing 727 had a very specific, unique feature. Because its three engines were mounted high on the tail, the rear of the fuselage featured a ventral air stair, a set of stairs that could be lowered from the belly of the plane. Furthermore, the 727 could fly at incredibly slow speeds, around 170 knots, without stalling. Cooper knew this. He selected the one commercial jet in the sky that could effectively act as a paratrooper's jump ship. He sat in seat 18C, the very last row. He ordered a bourbon and 7-Up. He lit a Raleigh brand filter-tip cigarette. Shortly after takeoff, as the plane climbed over the dense Washington forests, Cooper handed a note to a 23-year-old flight attendant named Florence Schaffner. Assuming it was a lonely businessman slipping her his phone number, she dropped it in her purse. Cooper leaned in. His voice was calm, devoid of any distinct accent.
"Miss, you'd better look at that note. I have a bomb."
Schaffner unfolded the paper, written in neat, all-caps block letters with a felt-tip pen. The message was clear. "I have a bomb in my briefcase. I will use it if necessary. I want you to sit by me. You are being hijacked." She sat down. Cooper quietly popped the latches on his attaché case. Inside, Schaffner saw 8 red cylinders, resembling dynamite, wired to a large, cylindrical battery. Whether the bomb was real or a brilliantly constructed hoax is a debate that forensic experts wage to this day. But to the crew of Flight 305, it was real enough. Cooper laid out his demands. They were precise, calculated, and baffling to authorities on the ground. He wanted $200,000 in negotiable American currency, all in $20 bills. He wanted 4 parachutes, 2 primary back parachutes, and 2 reserve chest parachutes. And he wanted a fuel truck waiting in Seattle. Why 4 parachutes? This demand paralyzed the FBI. If he asked for 1, they could give him a defective chute. But by asking for 4, the FBI had to assume Cooper intended to take hostages with him, perhaps Florence Schaffner or another flight attendant. Terrified of being responsible for the death of their own crew, the FBI was forced to provide perfectly functional, inspected parachutes. It was a masterstroke of psychological warfare. While the FBI frantically scoured Seattle area banks to compile the 10,000 $20 bills weighing exactly 21 pounds and microfilming every serial number, Flight 305 circled Puget Sound. For over 2 hours, the 36 passengers in the cabin sat in blissful ignorance, told by Captain William Scott that they were simply experiencing a minor mechanical delay. Behind them, sitting in a cloud of Raleigh cigarette smoke, a ghost was waiting for his payday. At 5:46 p.m., Flight 305 touched down at Seattle-Tacoma International Airport. Night had fallen. A brutal winter storm was moving in. Cooper demanded the plane be taxied to an isolated, brightly lit section of the apron. He ordered all cabin window shades pulled down to blind police snipers. Northwest Orient's Seattle operations manager approached the aircraft and handed a canvas bag full of cash and the parachutes to flight attendant Tena Bar via the aft stairs. True to his word, once Cooper inspected the money and the chutes, he let all 36 passengers go. He also released Schaffner. Left on board were Captain Scott, First Officer NORJAK, Flight Engineer Anderson, and Tena Bar. Now, let us examine a critical forensic detail. The parachutes. The FBI scrambled to get these from a local skydiving school. They provided Cooper with a military-issue NB6 back parachute and a civilian Pioneer Reserve chute. But they also accidentally gave him a dummy reserve chute, a non-functional prop used for classroom demonstrations that was accidentally sewn shut. Shockingly, as Cooper prepared for his jump, he put on the military NB6 and he strapped the dummy reserve to his chest. He left a perfectly good functional reserve chute on the plane. Did he make a fatal mistake in the dark cabin? Or did he recognize it was a dummy and simply use it as a pouch to hold the heavy bags of money? This single decision is the crux of the debate. Was Cooper a master skydiver or an incredibly lucky amateur? At 7:40 p.m., the Boeing 727 took off again, heading south toward Mexico City. But Cooper had dictated an impossible flight envelope. He demanded the plane fly at exactly 10,000 feet. He demanded the landing gear stay down. He demanded the wing flaps be set to 15 degrees, and he ordered the cabin to remain unpressurized. Would the aircraft lumbered through the sky along a designated airway, known as Victor 23. Outside, it was a nightmare. Pitch black, heavy rain turning to sleet, an ambient temperature of 19 degrees Fahrenheit, but with the 200-mile-per-hour wind chill of the jet stream, the air outside the rear door was minus 70 degrees. Cooper ordered Tena Bar into the cockpit. He was now alone in the rear of the aircraft. At 8 p.m., a warning light flashed on the cockpit instrument panel. The aft ventral stairs had been unlatched and lowered into the roaring slipstream. Captain Scott picked up the intercom.
Is there anything we can do for you?
Cooper's final word to the world was a single, curt reply.
No.
At 8:13 p.m., the aircraft's tail section suddenly pitched upward. The pilots had to quickly trim the controls to keep the plane level. The massive aerodynamic shift meant only one thing. The weight on the stairs was gone. Dan Cooper had stepped off the edge of the world. Wearing a trench coat, a business suit, and loafers, he vanished into a freezing abyss over the dense, unforgiving wilderness of the Pacific Northwest. When Flight 305 finally landed in Reno, Nevada, with its rear stairs still dragging near the tarmac, the FBI swarmed the plane. Cooper was gone. He left behind the dummy parachute, 2 of his Raleigh cigarette butts, and his J.C. Penney clip-on tie. For decades, the FBI scoured the forests of Washington. Operation NORJAK became the most exhaustive manhunt in U.S. history. They used SR-71 Blackbird spy planes. They used submarines in Lake Merwin. They found nothing. Until 1980, 8-year-old Brian Ingram was digging a fire pit on the sandy banks of the Columbia River at a place called Tena Bar, just northwest of Portland. His shovel hit something strange. It was 3 bundles of rotting $20 bills, held together by brittle rubber bands. The total was $5,800. The FBI matched the serial numbers. It was Cooper's money, but forensics raised more questions than answers. Diatom analysis, the study of microscopic algae found on the bills, suggested the money entered the water months after the hijacking. If Cooper died on impact, how did the money get to Tena Bar completely upstream from his estimated drop zone. And then there is the tie. In 2007, a team of civilian scientists known as the Citizen Sleuths analyzed Cooper's tie using a scanning electron microscope. They found over 100,000 microscopic particles, among them pure unalloyed titanium, bismuth, antimony, cerium. In 1971, these rare metals were not found on the street. They were found in highly restricted, cutting-edge aerospace laboratories. Specifically, they were used in the development of the Boeing Supersonic Transport SST project, a project that had just suffered massive layoffs in the Seattle area months before the hijacking. The tie tells a story. Cooper wasn't a mobster. He wasn't a common thief. He was likely an aerospace engineer or a chemical metallurgist who worked in a clean room. He was a man who helped build the planes he eventually hijacked. In July of 2016, after 45 years, the FBI officially closed the D.B. Cooper investigation. They cited a lack of credible leads and a need to allocate resources elsewhere. But for true crime researchers, the case is never closed. Was he Richard McCoy, the copycat hijacker with the blue eyes? Was he Robert Rackstraw, the Black Ops helicopter pilot with a penchant for explosives? Or did he simply shatter against the pine trees of Washington, his bones swallowed by the earth, leaving behind nothing but a name on a ticket and a handful of titanium dust? The discovery of the titanium particles and the Tena Bar money gave the FBI physical evidence, but it didn't give them a name. The FBI officially designated the manhunt Operation NORJAK, short for Northwest Hijacking. What began the morning after Thanksgiving in 1971 would become the longest, most exhaustive, and ultimately most frustrating manhunt in American history. Over the next 5 decades, the Bureau investigated more than 800 suspects. Most were dead ends, drunks boasting in dive bars, or petty thieves trying to claim infamy. But out of those 800, a few men emerged from the shadows who possessed the exact terrifying set of skills required to execute the perfect skyjacking. If you want to catch a phantom, you look for a man who moves like one. And just 5 months after D.B. Cooper vanished, the FBI thought they had caught their ghost. On April 7th, 1972, a man boarded United Airlines Flight 855 in Denver, Colorado. The aircraft was, once again, a Boeing 7027. He handed the flight attendant a note. He demanded $500,000 and 4 parachutes. After the money was delivered, he ordered the plane back into the sky, lowered the rear ventral stairs, and parachuted into the dark skies over Provo, Utah. The similarities were so identical that the FBI immediately thought D.B. Cooper had returned for a second payday. The man who jumped over Utah was named Richard Floyd McCoy, Jr. McCoy was not a civilian. He was a Sunday school teacher, a devoted family man, and a highly decorated combat veteran. During the Vietnam War, McCoy served 2 tours. He was a Green Beret, a warrant officer, and an expert helicopter pilot who flew rescue missions under heavy enemy fire. He was awarded the Purple Heart and the Distinguished Flying Cross. More importantly, McCoy was a passionate, high-altitude skydiver. He had hundreds of jumps under his belt. He knew exactly how to exit an aircraft, and he knew how to survive a drop into rough terrain. But McCoy's execution of his own hijacking was sloppy compared to Cooper's pristine operation. McCoy left behind a handwritten note which matched his handwriting perfectly. He left a fingerprint on a magazine he had been reading in his seat. 2 days after jumping out of Flight 855, the FBI arrested him at his home. When the NORJAK task force in Seattle heard about McCoy's arrest, they descended on Utah. Was this D.B. Cooper? Even recently, in 2024, a parachute harness found on McCoy family property in North Carolina reignited the theory among amateur sleuths. But the FBI's profiling told a different story. First, there was the alibi. Investigators placed McCoy in Utah, having Thanksgiving dinner with his family the day after the Cooper hijacking. For McCoy to be Cooper, he would have had to parachute into the Washington wilderness at night, hike out, find a way to an airport, and fly back to Utah undetected, all in less than 24 hours. Second, the physical discrepancies. Flight attendants Florence Schaffner and Tina Mucklow spent hours sitting next to D.B. Cooper. They looked him directly in the eyes. They insisted Cooper was in his mid-40s and had dark brown eyes. Richard McCoy was only 29 years old in 1971, and his eyes were a piercing, unmistakable light blue. Ultimately, McCoy was convicted for the United Airlines hijacking and sentenced to 45 years. 2 years later, he escaped from federal prison using a fake gun carved from dental paste. In a shootout with the FBI in Virginia, McCoy was killed. He took his secrets to the grave, but the Bureau officially ruled him out. He was brilliant, he was daring, but he was just a copycat. If D.B. Cooper wasn't a combat-hardened Green Beret, then perhaps he was something much more insidious. Perhaps he was a man who already wore the uniform of the airline he robbed. Enter suspect number 2, Kenneth Christensen. Christensen joined the Army in 1944. He was trained as a paratrooper, learning how to pack his own chutes and execute drops into hostile territory. After the war, he needed a job. He applied to an airline and was hired as a mechanic, and later, a flight attendant and purser. The airline he worked for, Northwest Orient, the very airline D.B. Cooper hijacked. Christensen knew the Boeing 7027 intimately. He knew the layout of the cabin, the procedures of the crew, and the mechanics of the aft ventral stairs. He knew the flight paths of the Pacific Northwest. He lived in Washington State, perfectly positioned near the drop zone. But it's the physical resemblance that sends a chill down the spine of true crime researchers. When you place a photograph of Kenneth Christensen from 1971 next to the FBI composite sketch of D.B. Cooper, the similarities are terrifying. The receding hairline, the prominent jaw, the distinct, thin lips. Christensen was left-handed, just like Cooper. He drank bourbon, just like Cooper. He smoked cigarettes, just like Cooper. Shortly after the hijacking, Christensen, a man who lived on a meager flight attendant's salary, suddenly purchased a house in Washington. He paid in cash. For the rest of his life, he lived quietly, keeping a low profile. In 1994, Christensen lay dying of cancer. His brother Lyle came to visit him. Kenneth pulled his brother close and uttered a cryptic deathbed confession that would fuel decades of speculation. He whispered,
"There is something you should know, but I cannot tell you."
Kenneth died, taking that secret with him. When his family cleaned out his estate, they found a stash of gold coins, a collection of Northwest Orient memorabilia, and a bank account that seemed far too large for a retired purser. So, was the insider actually the Phantom? In 2007, a highly publicized investigation brought Christians to the forefront of the Cooper mythos. The FBI agreed to review his file, but once again, the physical evidence provided a stubborn roadblock. Florence Schaffner, the flight attendant who sat next to Cooper, was shown photos of Christensen. She said he wasn't the man. Like McCoy, Christensen was shorter than the reported height, and his eyes were blue, not brown. Furthermore, when the citizen sleuths extracted DNA from the J.C. Penney clip-on tie left on seat 18C, they compared it to DNA obtained from Christensen's family members. It was not a match. The FBI closed the file on Kenneth Christensen. He was a man of secrets, but he was not Dan Cooper. Our third suspect is a man who lived a life so bizarre, so steeped in deception, that if you wrote it in a Hollywood script, it would be rejected as unbelievable. Robert W. Rackstraw Sr. was a man who thrived in chaos. During the Vietnam War, he served in the Army's 1st Cavalry Division. He was a helicopter pilot, an explosives expert, and a paratrooper. He flew Black Ops missions, dropping flares and operatives into the dense jungle canopies of Southeast Asia. He knew how to rig a bomb. He knew how to jump out of an aircraft in the pitch black. But Rackstraw was also a master con artist. He was discharged from the military for conduct unbecoming an officer, including falsifying his college records and lying about his rank. In 1978, Rackstraw was arrested in Iran and deported back to the United States to face charges of aircraft theft, possession of explosives, and check-kiting. He even faked his own death by crashing an airplane into Monterey Bay, California, only to be found alive months later by federal agents. In 1979, the FBI took a very hard look at Rackstraw for the D.B. Cooper hijacking. He possessed the exact paramilitary skill set required. He had the explosive knowledge to construct the briefcase bomb. When he wore a suit and dark aviator glasses, he looked strikingly similar to the FBI composite sketch, but Rackstraw's greatest weapon was his own ego. He loved to play games with the media. When reporters asked him point blank if he was D.B. Cooper, he would offer a wry, knowing smile.
I could have been him.
Rackstraw would tease.
I could have done it, but if I did, do you think I'd tell you?
Rackstraw became the focal point of several massive investigations, most notably by a team of cold case investigators featured in a 2016 documentary. They claimed to have cracked coded letters sent to newspapers by the hijacker in late 1971, arguing the ciphers contained Rackstraw's military unit identification. It was a compelling narrative, the rogue operative pulling off the ultimate heist, but the FBI once again stepped in to pour cold water on the fire. In 1971, Robert Rackstraw was only 28 years old. The flight crew explicitly stated Cooper was an older man, showing signs of aging, with a receding hairline. Rackstraw had a full, thick head of hair and looked like a young man. Furthermore, the FBI had cleared him of the Cooper hijacking back in 1979 after failing to find any direct physical evidence linking him to the Pacific Northwest on Thanksgiving Eve. Robert Rackstraw passed away in 2019. To his dying breath, he never confirmed nor denied the allegations, happy to let the world wonder if he was the ghost who jumped from Flight 305. McCoy, Christensen, Rackstraw, three men who possessed the skills, the opportunity, and the audacity to pull off the impossible. Yet the forensic truth remains a relentless gatekeeper. The eye color, the age, the DNA. This brings us back to the most critical piece of evidence, the clip-on tie and the titanium particles. If Cooper wasn't a military commando, then the science points to a completely different kind of suspect. Enter Sheridan Peterson. Peterson wasn't a criminal. He was a technical editor for the Boeing Company in Seattle. He worked out of the exact facilities where the 727 was designed. In fact, Peterson literally wrote the manual for the Boeing 727. He knew every bolt, every wire, and every aerodynamic limit of the ventral air stair. Even more compelling, during his youth, Peterson was a smoke jumper. He was paid to parachute into burning forests in rough terrain to fight wildfires. He was the perfect hybrid, a Boeing insider with extreme parachuting experience. When the FBI investigated him, they noted he loved to wear suits with cheap clip-on ties. But Peterson had an incredible alibi. He claimed that during the autumn of 1971, he was living in a mud hut in Nepal, protesting the Vietnam War. The FBI could never definitively place him in Portland on November 24th, but for many forensic experts, the titanium engineer remains the most scientifically sound theory in the entire NORJAK file. In July of 2016, after 45 years, the FBI officially closed the D.B. Cooper investigation. They cited a lack of credible leads and a need to allocate resources elsewhere. But for true crime researchers, the case is never closed. Was he Richard McCoy, the copycat hijacker with the blue eyes? Was he Robert Rackstraw, the Black Ops helicopter pilot with a penchant for explosives? Was he Sheridan Peterson, the Boeing insider? Or did he simply shatter against the pine trees of Washington, his bones swallowed by the earth, leaving behind nothing but a name on a ticket and a handful of titanium dust? That's where I turn it over to you. What do you think happened to D.B. Cooper? Did he survive the jump, or was the money at Tena Bar washed down from a corpse? Let me know your prime suspect down in the comments. I'll be reading and replying to the most detailed theories. If you enjoyed this massive deep dive into aviation's greatest ghost story, do me a huge favor and smash that like button. It pushes this video out to the algorithm and helps us fund these massive, feature-length documentary projects. If you're new here, make sure to subscribe and ring the bell so you don't miss our next historical true crime investigation. You can click the video on the left for another unsolved mystery, or the video on the right for our playlist of cold cases. As always, stay curious, stay safe, and I will see you in the next one.